Imagine this. You wake up one morning to find the world eerily quiet, not silent, but hollow, as though the air itself has lost its weight. You scroll through your phone, past the endless videos, memes, and hot takes, and you feel nothing. Everything is louder than ever, yet somehow emptier. People are shouting opinions, trading insults, performing their outrage for invisible audiences, but where are the questions that actually matter? Where are the ideas that stretch your mind, that keep you awake at night with their gravity? Step outside, look around. Conversations feel paper thin. People laugh at jokes they barely find funny. Eyes stay glued to glowing screens. Even when another human being is standing right in front of them, it feels as though the entire world is speaking in shorter and shorter sentences, forgetting not just history, but also the art of reflection itself. Have you noticed it too? This slow erosion of depth? This collective drift towards shallowness? And here lies the great paradox. We live in an era with more access to information than at any point in history. The sum total of human knowledge is available to you right now in your pocket. Every question, every book, every discovery is one tap away. So why does it feel as though we are not becoming wiser, but stupider? Why does it seem that the more connected we are, the more fragmented our minds become? Today, we are going to explore a disturbing and fascinating question. Why is society becoming more stupid every day? And most importantly, what can we do about it? Stay with me until the very end, because the last insight I will share is the most important one of all. And it has the power to completely transform how you understand the modern world. Before we dive deeper, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Leave a like on this video, share it with someone you care about, and tell me in the comments what you think about the state of society today. Your voice matters, and by participating in this discussion, you become part of a community striving to awaken from the fog of mediocrity and reclaim the clarity of true thought. Pause and think. When was the last time you held one idea in your mind long enough for it to transform you? When was the last time you read something that required slow digestion, that forced you to wrestle with it for days? The uncomfortable truth is that we are losing that ability, not because of some sudden catastrophe, but because of millions of tiny choices, our craving for speed, our hunger for distraction, our willingness to be entertained rather than enlightened. This is not just an intellectual problem, it is existential. If we are indeed becoming less capable of sustained thought, what does that mean for the future of democracy, art, science, morality? What happens to a society that forgets how to think deeply, that prefers sound bites over philosophy, hashtags over history? Can a civilization built on superficiality survive the challenges of the future? Perhaps you've sensed it in your own life. The difficulty of sitting with a single thought without checking your phone. The anxiety that creeps in during moments of silence. The compulsion to refresh the feed, as though meaning itself might appear in the next scroll. And perhaps the most disturbing question of all. What if this isn't just happening to you, but to everyone? What if we are all, slowly and quietly, losing the ability to confront complexity, to sit with nuance, to seek truth even when it hurts? Imagine a future where this trend continues unchecked, where conversations become nothing but noise, where decisions are made not with reason but with reaction, where entire nations are guided by emotional impulses amplified by algorithms, a world where wisdom is no longer passed down, but replaced by whatever captures attention for a few fleeting seconds. Are we already living in that future? Look closer. The signs are everywhere. Public debates devolving into tribal warfare. Education systems measuring success by standardized scores rather than independent thought. Media reducing the world's most complex problems into 30-second clips. The algorithm curating not what is true, but what is profitable. And we willing participants keep clicking, keep consuming, keep surrendering a little more of our capacity for depth. Is this progress? Is this what all of history, all of philosophy, all of science was leading toward, a society distracted into submission? Or have we mistaken motion for meaning, information for wisdom, connection for understanding? There is an unsettling possibility. Perhaps society is not simply becoming stupid by accident. Perhaps stupidity is being manufactured, rewarded, amplified, and sold back to us as culture. Perhaps the very systems that promise to enlighten us are the ones profiting from keeping us shallow, reactive, and divided. If that is true, then the question is no longer just, why is society becoming more stupid every day? The question becomes far more personal, far more dangerous. Will you let it happen to you? Because this is no longer about society, it is about your mind, your choices, your future. If we cannot reverse this tide, then we risk losing something far greater than intelligence. We risk losing ourselves. And that is where our journey begins. To understand why society appears to be growing more foolish with each passing day, we must go beneath the surface, beyond technology, beyond politics, beyond the headlines, and enter the labyrinth of the human mind. The problem is not merely that we are drowning in information. The problem is that we have lost the ability, and perhaps even the desire, to turn information into wisdom. Nietzsche foresaw this decline when he spoke of the last man, a creature who seeks comfort above all else, avoids anything that causes discomfort or demands struggle, and lives in a world stripped of higher purpose. What is love? What is creation? What is longing? He asked, describing a future where such questions no longer matter. The last man does not dream of greatness. He seeks only to be untroubled. This prophecy reads today like a warning for our age of curated feeds, convenience, culture, and collective intellectual sedation. Jung would call this our refusal to confront the shadow, the hidden parts of ourselves we'd rather not face. True growth, he argued, comes from wrestling with these uncomfortable realities. Yet our culture seems bent on shielding us from discomfort at all costs. Instant gratification replaces delayed fulfillment. Safe, surface-level answers replace wrestling with paradox. The result is a psyche that never matures an adult population conditioned to think like children, avoiding complexity and seeking constant stimulation. Philosophy, too, has tried to rouse us from this sleep. Jean-Paul Sartre warned that man is condemned to be free, which means we are responsible for creating meaning in a meaningless world. But that responsibility is heavy, and many prefer to flee from it. The French existentialist would say that we distract ourselves precisely because we fear freedom's burden. We fear the blank page of existence, so we fill it with noise. This avoidance has consequences that extend beyond the personal. When an entire culture refuses to think deeply, the collective intelligence begins to degrade. Political discourse becomes polarized and simplistic because nuance is unbearable. Education drifts toward standardization because ambiguity is inconvenient. Media panders to outrage because outrage is easier to sell than reflection. The structure of society itself begins to mirror the weaknesses of the human psyche. And here lies the most unsettling insight. This decline is not simply happening to us, it is happening through us. Every time we click on a headline without reading the article, every time we react before we reflect, every time we choose distraction over depth, we are feeding the very forces that erode our capacity to think. But the deepest layer of this problem is not technological or even social, it is spiritual. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, argued that the primary drive of human beings is not pleasure, as Freud claimed, or power, as Adler believed, but meaning. And when meaning is absent, neurosis, nihilism, and despair rush in to fill the void. Is it any wonder that in a world obsessed with entertainment, anxiety, and depression are epidemic? We are not merely facing an intellectual crisis, we are facing a crisis of meaning. And until we confront this root cause, no amount of information, education, or innovation will save us. If the hidden problem is a crisis of meaning and the erosion of depth, then the consequences are not abstract, they are already everywhere, quietly reshaping how you live, work, and think. You can feel it in the tension in your chest after hours of doom scrolling, in the hollowness after consuming a day's worth of content that you barely remember, in the way your attention seems fractured even when you want to focus. The first consequence is cognitive. Our very ability to think is being rewired. Neuroscientists warn that the brain is plastic. It changes in response to its environment. The more we train it on rapid, fragmented inputs, the more it craves them, making sustained attention feel unnatural. Nicholas Carr in The Shallows described how digital overstimulation makes deep reading and contemplation more difficult. You have probably felt this yourself, the urge to skim rather than read, the discomfort of sitting with a difficult book or a complex argument. This is not just laziness, it is neurological adaptation. But the damage does not stop with the mind. When attention collapses, memory soon follows. A culture that cannot remember, cannot learn. Trends flare and vanish within days, leaving little behind but a trail of outrage and exhaustion. Santayana warned that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But what happens when forgetting is no longer accidental but systemic, designed into the very platforms that mediate our reality? History becomes entertainment, politics becomes theater, and tomorrow's disasters arrive without warning because we have forgotten yesterday's lessons. Socially, the consequences are just as corrosive. Shallow thinking breeds shallow discourse. Public debate turns into performance, where the loudest voice wins, not the most reasoned. Algorithms reward outrage, because outrage keeps you scrolling. And so, polarization grows sharper, empathy shrinks, and dialogue collapses into warring camps. The collective mind fragments into echo chambers, each one more convinced of its righteousness, each one less willing to listen. This is not just an inconvenience, it is dangerous. A society that cannot think together, cannot solve problems together. Complex issues, climate change, poverty, justice, require nuance, patience, and collaboration. But when the public sphere is flooded with noise, these problems are either ignored or reduced to slogans. The result? Stagnation, or worse, regression. Even our emotional lives are affected. When everything becomes instant, constant, and loud, we lose the capacity for depth of feeling. Joy becomes stimulation. Love becomes validation. Suffering becomes content. We share our pain not to process it, but to perform it. In this endless cycle of display and reaction, we risk losing touch with what is truly human. The quiet dignity of grief, the slow ripening of joy, the long labor of forgiveness. The final and perhaps most dangerous consequence is that this collective shallowing makes us easier to control. A distracted population is a docile population. As Michel Foucault observed, power is most effective not when it is overtly repressive, but when it shapes the very field of thought, when it decides what people pay attention to, what they fear, what they desire. If our mental space is constantly occupied by trivialities, we have no time left to question, to resist, to imagine alternatives. And so we arrive at a grim conclusion. The consequences of society's intellectual decline are not just cultural, they are existential. When a civilization loses its capacity for depth, it risks losing the very qualities that make it capable of renewal. The danger is not that we will face some sudden catastrophe, but that we will sink into a slow, comfortable collapse, too distracted to notice until it is too late. Yet even in this darkness, there is the faint outline of a way out, because the very awareness of these consequences is the beginning of rebellion. To see clearly is to begin to resist. Rebellion begins in the smallest, most hidden place imaginable, your own mind. If the crisis of society is that our attention has been colonized, then the first act of defiance is to take it back. Not with a grand gesture, not with slogans or hashtags, but with the quiet, radical decision to reclaim your focus. Imagine what it would mean to become immune to the algorithm, to refuse to be a puppet pulled by the strings of outrage, novelty, and fear. The rebellion is not fought on battlefields, but in moments of choice, when you decide to close the app and open a book, when you choose to sit with discomfort rather than numb it with distraction, when you pause before reacting and let silence speak first. This is not easy. It feels, at first, like swimming against a relentless current. But history shows us that renewal always begins with the few who dare to step outside the collective trance. The Stoics of ancient Rome practiced this form of rebellion. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire, still reminded himself daily that his thoughts were the only thing he could truly control. "You have power over your mind, not outside events," he wrote. "Realize this, and you will find strength." Strength then begins with self-mastery. Build it deliberately. Create space in your life where depth can flourish. Time to think. Time to read slowly. Time to speak honestly. Train your mind to love complexity again. This is not nostalgia for a slower past. It is preparation for a wiser future. Break the cycle of passive consumption by cultivating what Viktor Frankl called the space between stimulus and response. In that space lies the power to choose. And choosing differently, consistently, transforms not just your mind, but the culture you inhabit. One person practicing depth creates ripples. Communities can form around these ripples, people who refuse to be defined by noise and distraction. Consider the historical moments when small groups reshaped entire civilizations. The early humanists of the Renaissance preserved and translated ancient texts, sparking an intellectual rebirth. The salons of the Enlightenment were places where citizens debated philosophy, science, and politics with a seriousness we rarely see today, and those conversations gave birth to revolutions. Even in oppressive regimes, dissidents have kept the flame of free thought alive by sharing forbidden books, writing clandestine essays, speaking truth in whispers until truth became unstoppable. Your rebellion might not look dramatic, but it is no less radical. Turn your devices into tools rather than masters. Seek out long-form ideas that challenge you, not just those that comfort you. Learn to sit with paradox instead of rushing to resolve it. When you encounter outrage, ask yourself, who profits from my anger? When you face complexity, remind yourself, the harder it is to understand, the more likely it is worth understanding. Most importantly, build community, not echo chambers, but circles of dialogue where honest disagreement sharpens thought rather than destroys it. The philosopher Martin Buber spoke of the I-thou relationship, where we meet others not as objects, but as subjects, as co-creators of meaning. This kind of encounter is the antidote to the shallowness that divides us. Breaking free is not about escaping society, but about transforming your relationship with it. It is about becoming the kind of person whose presence quietly awakens others, whose refusal to be distracted becomes contagious. And yet, there is a deeper truth, still one final insight that transforms rebellion from a personal act into a spiritual revolution. Because what we are fighting for is not just focus, not just clarity, but something far more profound, the soul of a civilization. The final and most powerful realization is this: the decline of society's intelligence is not the real tragedy. The real tragedy is that we have started to accept it as normal. You can already see it in the way people shrug at lies in politics, laugh off misinformation as just the internet being the internet, or treat distraction as inevitable as though the very erosion of thought were a natural disaster rather than a choice. The danger is not merely that stupidity is rising, it is that wisdom is becoming irrelevant. And if wisdom becomes irrelevant, then so too does the possibility of a future worth living. This is the deepest insight. Society's descent into superficiality is not simply something happening to you. It is a mirror. It reflects what we have chosen to prioritize, the values we have silently agreed to uphold. Our crisis is not technological. It is moral and spiritual. We are not just drowning in information. We are starving for meaning. This realization is terrifying because it leaves no one to blame but ourselves. It is easier to blame them, the politicians, the media corporations, the tech giants. And yes, they exploit the situation, but they exploit it with our permission. Every click, every scroll, every moment of surrender is a vote for the world we now inhabit. And yet, this is also the most empowering truth. Because if we helped create this world, we can also help uncreate it. We are not prisoners of history. We are its authors. This is where the paradigm shift must occur. You are not simply a victim of the culture around you. You are a participant. Your attention is not just a passive resource. It is the most valuable currency you own. Every time you choose depth over distraction, you are not just helping yourself. You are resisting the machinery of collective shallowing. You are planting a flag for a different kind of future. Imagine, for a moment, that millions made this same choice. Imagine a society where slow thinking became fashionable, where curiosity was celebrated, where disagreement was seen not as war, but as the raw material for progress. Imagine schools that taught students to wrestle with uncertainty rather than memorize answers. Imagine news outlets that rewarded depth instead of speed. Imagine social networks designed to elevate truth rather than emotion. Does that sound impossible? Perhaps. But every revolution has always sounded impossible before it began. The deeper truth is that the battle against stupidity is not really about intellect. It is about awakening. It is about refusing to live unconsciously, refusing to outsource your thinking to whatever shouts the loudest. It is about remembering that intelligence is not measured by how much you know, but by how deeply you can see. This is why the last and most important step is not just rebellion, it is transcendence. You must go beyond merely avoiding distraction and begin to create meaning, not just consume, but contribute, not just reject what is shallow, but build what is deep. This is how civilizations are renewed. When enough people stop waiting for someone else to fix the world and begin to embody the change themselves. And here is the paradox. You do not need to fix the entire world. You do not even need to fix society. You only need to become the kind of person who cannot be bought by distraction, cannot be seduced by false certainty, cannot be pacified by cheap entertainment. One person who thinks clearly, acts courageously, and speaks truthfully can change the environment around them. Clarity is contagious. The ultimate truth, then, is not that society is becoming more stupid every day. The ultimate truth is that you do not have to. You can choose to live awake in a world that is asleep. You can choose to remember what everyone else has forgotten, that your mind is yours, that your attention is sacred, that your life is not just a reaction to headlines, but a deliberate creation. You can choose to cultivate wisdom so rare, so luminous, that it becomes a form of quiet rebellion against the noise of the age. And if you do this, something remarkable happens. The world does not suddenly become quieter, but you do. The chaos is still there. The distractions still scream, but they no longer own you. You begin to notice the still point at the center of the storm. You begin to live not reactively, but intentionally. And perhaps, just perhaps, if enough of us find this still point, the tide can turn. Societies have fallen into darkness before, and they have risen again. The Renaissance was born from ruins. The Enlightenment rose out of centuries of superstition. Each awakening began when a few refused to accept the world as it was handed to them. Now it is your turn. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the kind of world you wish existed. One where wisdom is valued, where discourse is deep, where children grow up learning not just what to think, but how to think. Imagine it vividly until you can feel it in your chest. Then open your eyes and realize that this vision will not come from governments or corporations or algorithms. It begins with you. This is not just a call to action. It is an invitation to live differently, to think differently, to be different. The choice is yours. You can let the tide of distraction carry you wherever it wishes, or you can stand firm, plant your feet, and become the kind of person future generations will thank for keeping the flame of wisdom alive. The great question we began with was, why is society becoming more stupid every day? The greater question we end with is, what will you do now that you see it?